Jackie Meyer here, and welcome to the Concierge CPA podcast. I have a wonderful guest with me today, not only a CPA, but also an attorney. He is one of our former CCA students, so we'll talk a little bit about the coaching program there. And he has had a lot of experiences happening to him over the last year or so that we want to get some insights. So welcome so much, Mike. We appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the show, and I've been watching your stuff for a few years now, so it's an honor to speak with you.
Of course, yeah. So fill in the gaps a little bit about where you came from, where you're at now, and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, so I knew in college I wanted to be a business owner, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And so I studied accounting, got my CPA license, but I knew I didn't want to work in audit. Started to figure out that tax was my passion. And so I ended up going to law school and became a tax lawyer. I started my career at Ernst & Young, spent most of my first 7 years there. I did have a brief stint at a law firm where I practiced transactional law and then went back. And what I figured out was I was getting 2 or 3 phone calls a week from potential clients who I couldn't take because I was at the big firm. And I was also having this feeling that the big firm wasn't going to be a long-term fit for me because it felt like they prioritized the firm and internal processes and all of this stuff that didn't interest me over client experience. And so
To say the
eventually,
least, right? I mean, yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So I eventually decided, I don't think there's much risk in going out on my own. And so at the end of 2017, I started my own law firm and CPA firm. And then I ran them side by side for a few years until Arizona changed its rules, allowing lawyers and non-lawyers to share fees. And so we combined the law firm and the accounting firm into one practice. And that's what we do now.
Very cool. Okay. And you have an interesting name, which if you happen to be watching the video of this, his logo's in the background. So Boss Advisors, which is very like sharp, right? So how did that come about in regards to the combination of the law firm and the CPA firm? And were there any issues with that with the state? You know how some states require that your name be in there as a CPA and all that junk?
Yeah, Arizona is pretty business friendly, fortunately, and so we're able to use fictitious names here. Boss came to me at 3 a.m. literally one night. I woke up. I had been spending way too much time trying to think of a name. My business partner at the time had a German name that was in our firm name, and it was like 4 vowels and 4 consonants next to each other, and so it was hard to pronounce. And so we wanted to step back from people asking for us by name and focus more on the firm instead of us as individuals. And so we changed it to Boss Advisors, and Boss is capitalized intentionally. It stands for Business Owner Systems and Strategies. So that's what we really target is business owners and specifically professional service providers. I've worked with a few business coaches. Brandon Hall is one that I've worked with and enjoyed working with. And he basically said, why don't you proposition yourself as a firm that provides accounting services for law firms and legal services for accounting firms? And that's worked really well for us because especially, having run both firms and worked with lots of different lawyers and accountants, I feel like those are the business models I understand better than anything else. And so that's what I specialize in.
Cool. And underneath your title, you've got business, legal, tax, and charity. Tell me about the charity component.
Yeah, so that's it's funny. I started out at Ernst & Young, like I said, out of law school. When I took the job, it was a position in the tax exempt organization group. And at the time, I knew what a nonprofit was, but I had no idea what the depth of the nonprofit world. And so I spent my first 7 years in practice hyper focused on nonprofits, and we did billion-dollar foundations and public charities, and we did the taxes for
Wow.
large hospital systems. So something I was able to, kind of a tool in my tool belt, I was able to bring over. I've brought a couple other nonprofit specialists from the same firm, and they've joined us, and so we're able to, as a small firm, we only have 10 people in our firm, but we're able to bid against some of the big four on different nonprofit jobs because of the specialty we have.
Wow. Okay. Gotcha. Now, I know that you had some big changes last year. You were in the Certified Concierge Accountant program. You weren't able to finish. Hopefully, we'll get you back in, but you had some significant circumstances happen. I know you had a partnership. Now you're on your own. Tell us kind of lessons learned about that.
Yeah, so I think this is more kind of touching on interpersonal, keeping yourself in balance. I've been on both sides of that, and for a while when I started my firm, I kind of got myself into a place where I felt like everything depended on me, and so I needed to. My sharpest tool was putting more hours in, right? And so I got myself to the point where I was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I would get up earlier and earlier, started at 5 a.m., then 4 a.m., then 3 a.m. And then some nights I'm not sleeping at all. I ended up eventually getting divorced, and my business partnership broke up. And so fortunately, I'm past the hard parts of all of that. And I'm on the side where lessons have been learned, absolutely valuable lessons that came with a lot of pain that I won't repeat again. And one thing that I'm hyper focused on now is scaling my business in the right way, getting support where I need it so that I don't feel like I have to work the extra hours. And probably for the last year, I haven't put in more than 50, 55 hours at all. And nobody on my staff has either. We're really, really focused on keeping everybody in balance because I don't want anybody to go through what I felt like I had to go through. In reality, I probably didn't need to do all those hours, and the firm would have been fine. Maybe we wouldn't have grown quite so quickly, but we would have been fine if I had just kept myself in balance before.
Yeah. Would you define yourself as like a workaholic, or do you think that was part of the problem?
Yeah, I think work provided a place for me to put a lot of my worries and my stress. It certainly provided enough for me to do to distract myself from other things in life. And so I'm not naturally a workaholic. I have a pretty good balance naturally. In that stage of life, it's what I felt like I had to do. So I probably during that time, I think I tended towards that, but now I'm
Yeah.
in a lot better place and spend time with my kids and have hobbies outside of work. And ironically, my business has continued to grow at the same rate, if not in a better way now that I'm keep taking care of myself because people can see that I'm happy. I'm a great guy to work with, and that's really all people want is somebody who's competent, but also somebody they want to spend time with. And so spending time golfing and, riding my motorcycle and doing these other things has created other connections that have led back to my business.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you've got like a really good positive vibe about you. So I can see what they mean. It's
Yeah,
funny,
thank you.
this concept of workaholism really just sneaks up on all of us. And suddenly one day we're working those 60 plus hours and we have no idea how we got there or why, like we felt like we had to do that. How did you get yourself out of that? It sounds like you kind of had some, hit some rock bottom issues. I've gone through some rock bottom issues myself with my health and
Yeah.
workaholism. That's what brought me out of it. Um, are there, I wish there were ways that I could convince people that haven't hit those rock bottoms yet to seek help and transform before something major happens. Do you have any tips or advice for people like that could help them?
Yeah. So this podcast I've used as well as other podcasts as a case study. And so I think whoever's listening now hopefully can learn these lessons from sounds like both of us who've been through pushing ourselves too hard and knowing that it's just not sustainable. I turned 40 a couple of weeks ago and I don't have the drive I
Oh,
used to have
we
anymore.
share we share 40th. So mine's next week. Yours was a couple
Okay.
weeks ago. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I'd love to have I wish I still had the energy from my early 30s, but I just don't anymore. I don't have the mental focus. And so I have to allocate that precious resource, my most productive time, which is the morning hours. And so I've got about 6 hours of really focused time in me. And then I've got a couple hours of where I can do some admin or some other smaller tasks. And so I have to really, really careful about time blocking and making sure I'm working on the right things at the right times. But I would say back to answer your question, find yourself in that situation. Just reach out to someone like Jackie, reach out to someone like me. We can help you talk through where you're at now, help you see maybe some of the things that you look at right now as these are immovable objects, and help you realize that actually no, these are things you can overcome. And maybe it's your mindset right now that is the thing that needs to change. And if you don't answer that email tonight, maybe everything's going to be okay. So maybe it's okay if, the worst consequence of you not answering that email is the client leaving. Maybe that's okay for that one client to leave, but most likely they won't leave. Most likely they'll understand that you're human too, and you get burned out, and you need to keep yourself in balance.
For sure. That reminds me, I don't know if I mentioned this on this podcast yet, but about a month ago, I decided I was completely done with emails. So for years, I've had an assistant checking my emails, prioritizing my emails. And even with that, I would go on these wonderful trips that I planned with my family. I said, I'm going to travel a whole month of the summer with my family. And this is like the third year I've been able to do that, which has been great. But I get back and it's a freaking disaster of like stuff I have to do, right? Even with everything like perfectly organized. So I'm like, I'm done. Lauren, you're taking my email. I turned on a permanent out of office responder, which you probably saw.
I've seen it. Yeah, no, that actually made it to the agenda for our visionary integrator meeting that I have with my practice manager. I was like, look at this. This is what I'm going for. And I've had somebody managing my emails for a few years now as well, but there's always ones that fall back to me. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, wow, that could be me. I could totally do that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So my friends make fun of me because they're like, email doesn't bring you joy anymore, really? I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like I literally, that's the first thing I say. It doesn't bring me joy. I'm sorry, but this is not where my time and focus needs to be. Like I want to be out there helping people and talking to people and stuff like that. So it's been a big step, but it's relieved a lot of weight on my shoulders. So it's, always making progress, right?
Love it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you did take time blocking to heart from the CCA program. So you're doing your structured weeks, time blocking, which is like number one thing we recommend. To go back to something you said that I think is important to reiterate, you have to take a little bit of extra time in your day or week to plan ahead so that you are getting the things done that you think you need to do. And you mentioned, like, I know I only have 6 good hours in me of focused work, right? And so you have to plan around that in your day. And so when you're planning your next week, it's like, okay, I know I've got 6 good hours each day. Here's the blocks of when I can do that. I know I'm done for after 3 p.m. or, I go into a coma and there's no way I'm doing anything good at that point. And so I love those like small little tips that I think really probably help people with that focus. So that's great.
Yeah. So what I do is I hear a lot of people that they talk about, I use Sunday night to go block out my week and look at my calendar and plan. But for me, Sunday night is precious. That's precious time with my kids. That's precious time. I mean, when the NFL's on, that's basically a holiday every Sunday. I watch the Cardinals, and I don't want to spend my Sunday nights thinking about work. And so what I do is I don't take any meetings on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. All of my client meetings are on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then Monday, I have time to come in, and it's mostly internal meetings, but I have the first 4 hours of the day. That's when I plan my week. I don't need to squeeze that in on a weekend. I just make my schedule work for me. And I don't want to meet with people on Monday mornings. I want time to be reflective and be creative. And, I also do my books and kind of some, look at my finances on Mondays, but planning the week is my main objective. And by the time I'm done with that session, I'm ready to conduct a team meeting. I'm aware of what's going on in my firm. I know what my priorities are. And then I've blocked out time during the week to make sure the most important things get worked on.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. So I block Mondays and Fridays as well. I admit I'm finishing a doctorate, so I do some of that work then. But yeah, it's my day to kind of get into the groove. I don't want to spend any weekend or night hours doing work. It's like the principle of it, like recovering for workaholism. You're like, if I go back to sneaking in planning or an email or anything like that at night, like I'm cheating, right? So you just have to set like really strong boundaries for yourself. But yeah, I like that, kicking off the Monday work week with those details. So what are some other things that y'all have done that you say you love practice management? I'm like, how do you love practice management? Tell me your secrets about that.
Oh my gosh, I'm such a nerd. But I listen to a podcast every morning. I rotate between a few accounting practice management podcasts. The one that I started with was David Christello's podcast, Growing Your Firm, and that's where I actually heard about you for the first time, and that was several years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and so what I use that as my creative time. I walk my dog in the morning and listen to one podcast, get that done for the day. I'll put a plug in for the Earmark app, which gives me continuing education for listening to the podcast, which is huge. Um, but that's how I spend my extra time. If I'm reading a book, I do read fiction, but I've got a full library of practice management books and started with Michael Gerber's book, and I've read every kind of variation that comes from that. I listen to books, I read books. I've just figured out it's what drives me. It's what I'm passionate about. If I
Yeah.
am gonna come get into the office at 5 a.m. one morning because I have some extra time, I'm not going to work on a contract or a tax return at 5 a.m. I'm going to work on the firm for a couple hours until my day starts because that's what drives me.
Yeah, awesome. So give us some of your favorite books, or maybe just one that you're like, man, if the listeners have not read this, they really need to go drop everything and read it.
Okay, I'm going to cheat. Probably, probably my favorite book right now is The Business Playbook, and that's by Chris Ronzio. He's the guy that created Trainual, um, local from Arizona as well. I love that because we're really focused on systemizing right now, and
Mhm.
it's a basically a manual for systemizing and you know can I say processitizing, creating systems and
Cool. Yeah,
processes.
I like it.
Um, it really it puts it in a format that just it's similar to systemology, but it puts it into a really easy to use format in terms of looking at all the different systems in your firm and putting everything in its proper place, and then being able to create SOPs and a process for every single thing within your firm, which is what creates value. It's also what makes your life easier.
Here's an embarrassing fun fact about me. I didn't even know what SOP meant like over a year ago. I mean, it's like these terms you get introduced to, and now it's like everywhere. You're like, where's our SOP for this? Where's our SOP for that? So okay, what's the name of the book one more time? Because I want to make sure that I grab it as well.
Yeah, it's called the Business Playbook.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just interviewed on Seth David's podcast, and I was talking about how it really doesn't feel like we have a true end-to-end playbook for the accounting profession in general. Like, we've got traction and EOS. Are you familiar with those concepts?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we use a version of Traction, which I love. That's one of my top books as well, for sure.
Yeah, it's good, but like it's it helps you visualize the different aspects of your business. And I think something needs to go a little further than that with our industry in particular, in regards to making sure that we've optimized sales, marketing, customer service, operations. How do you measure the health of that in a firm? And then how do you optimize it? And so it sounds like this might be a step in that direction. So I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, there is a book. I completely agree with you. There's not one manual right now. There is a book for law firms that I think accomplishes that, and I think it could be a good model for creating one for the accounting industry. That one's called The Small Firm Roadmap,
Ooh,
and
okay,
it's
cool.
really good. It's written by the lawyerist, but even our professions are so parallel that reading the Small Firm Roadmap, and in fact, they just issued the second version, and I think I have like a small quote in there, which I'm really proud of. Um,
Oh, great. That's
so
awesome.
the industries are so similar. There's a ton you can learn from that book as well.
Yeah, I've always kind of felt sorry for attorneys because I felt like it's so much easier to value price tax advisory than it is to value price legal services. How have you worked with that and optimized that situation?
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, I think it's easier to scale accounting firms in general because you think of an accounting firm, you can really think of it as it can be run like a business. You can delegate and you can scale, things like basic bookkeeping and tax prep. For law firms, you typically think of them as a practice that you need higher level, you need attorneys working. So we've actually done that within both our tax and legal services. We've created a subscription model. Started with tax about probably 4 years ago, and that's been through, I don't know, probably 20 iterations, but I
Yeah,
now have it at
okay.
a
You have
point
to
where,
say that because people are like, I don't know where to start. I'm like, just do it. Just start. It's going to evolve and change constantly, but you got to start somewhere, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. You have to just get something going, and it's not going to be perfect, but it works. And you'll find that whatever version it's in, it's going to attract some customers, some clients. So we actually just recently, at the beginning of this year, launched a parallel legal subscription, which was really challenging. It took me about a year to scope that out and figure out what's the right mix of legal services to offer without
Yeah.
offering too much, but also being able to provide enough value to make it worth it for business owners.
Awesome. Okay. Well, don't leave me hanging on that. So tell me more. Like, how'd you do it?
Yeah, so basically, what I find is that business owners are looking for somebody that they can consult with when when the stuff hits the fan. We'll say, I don't know who's listening to the podcast. Somebody might be in their car with their kids.
Right.
So they need that real time access, and especially with legal services, but to the same extent with tax services. When you get an IRS notice, when you're sitting at the dealership trying to buy a vehicle and you forget, how should I do this? When there's, you get any sort of, you watch a video on TikTok and you're like, oh, I wonder if that plan would work for me. Same thing on the legal side. They need that real time access. So we include in our subscription on call advice, and we also include quarterly meetings so that we can proactively provide advice. And then with the taxes on the tax side, we provide the business and personal returns for the business owners. And we scale that so that if there are multiple entities that have to file, or if there are multiple K-1s to be issued, or we'll charge a little more for that. And it's all formulaic at this point. That's probably been the key for me, is getting myself out of the onboarding process, out of the quoting, because that was always my role, was to sit down and come up with this magical quote. And for the first couple of years, I was just making it up.
Huh?
I truly was just like out of the top of my head what I thought it would be worth and what I thought people should charge. And it was completely disproportionate and it was completely subjective. And so now I have a tool that I created that every client can be quoted by one of my administrative staff without me ever looking at it. All I have to say is, here's the type of client they are. So we do clients by profiles. So here's the profile of the client. Here's the services they need. And then from there, my admin team can take it. They can send a proposal. We use Ignition, and they can get them the right price, which is now completely objective, based on not just based on how much time it takes us. That's certainly something we consider, but primarily the factor is, what is the value of that service in the market. That's how we're pricing our services. The check that we use is, okay, how long does that take us to do that? Can we still hit our profit margin? If we can still hit our profit margin, which is, we're going for a 50% gross profit margin, if we can still hit that and we can charge what the value is in the market, then that's a service we'll provide. There's services that we choose not to provide, like payroll services, because the alternatives are so good now. We use Gusto for payroll, and I would never want
Yeah.
to compete against
It's
them.
pretty slick, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
just makes so much more sense. So I don't, no one wants to pay my hourly rate to do their payroll. And I'm not interested in being on call and running payroll every 2 weeks. So we automate that piece of our practice.
That makes sense. Yeah. So is this on the attorney side, or is this, are you packaging the tax work in with that, or are they separately quoted?
They're separately quoted, but what we do is we do integrate them, and that was a mistake that we made early on, was not integrating them, and so it kind of created this dynamic in our firm where there was tax versus legal. And so
Mm.
what we do now is, for our quarterly tax meetings, each quarter has a theme. And so we'll invite a financial advisor to join for one of the quarterly meetings. If they have their own, great. If not, then we have somebody in our network that will just do like a preliminary, and every financial advisor is happy to do this. They'll do a cursory review of the portfolio or whatever the holdings are, and just provide some valuable input, and they'll do that for free. And so that's the value we're able to provide to our clients. And then during one of our quarterly meetings, we have one of our lawyers join and just give some high level insight as to, hey, I've looked over your formation, your structure, I've looked over your contracts. Here's some observations I have. And it's great feedback for the client. And if that's all they get from it, then it's worth doing. Most of the time, it leads to additional work. So it's really a sales opportunity because then we're able to say, hey, we can restructure this in a way that's going to save you money, that's going to reduce your liability, reduce your risk. And we can do this on a subscription basis. So you don't have to pay $10,000 out of pocket today for legal services. You pay us X amount per month. And you have not only will we do this work up front, but you'll have access to us throughout the year.
Awesome. Okay, very cool. Yeah, so I know you said that you recently started using TaxPlan IQ. We actually just embedded a like suggested implementation fee tool in there, and it's kind of similar to what you described. I based it off of the AI CPA pricing tool, and so you've got like the intangible benefits that you're bringing to the table, and you kind of say whether it's low, medium, or high risk. The urgency level, the complexity, and the risk that is involved in the work. And then it kind of backs into that value price proposition, combining the tax savings with all these intangibles. So it was really hard to come up with that. But people were wanting it so bad for so long. And now I'm like, well, duh. I mean, I should have done that a long time ago. So
yeah, that's a huge tool. I saw that was released. I haven't been able to use it yet, but I love that so much because that eliminates the guessing game for a lot of us,
mhm.
which is, there's just not enough information, and not that we want to, get to the point of collusion, but there's just not enough information in the public forums to where we know it's really easy to determine what is the value of the services we're providing. That's always a guess, and it's hard to be accurate in your quotes when you're pulling it out of thin air every time.
For sure, for sure. All right. Do you have a favorite kind of productivity hack?
I definitely am going to go back to time blocking. It's been time blocking, and having somebody checking my emails has changed my life.
That's awesome.
Especially the latter. I'm not to the point where you are, where I don't look at emails at all, but there are
Yeah,
lots of days where I don't look at emails.
that's really,
But things are still being addressed, which is the key. You got to stay responsive. So
yeah, for sure. And is there a particular, I know you've already talked a lot about various lessons that you've learned over the years, but any other words of wisdom for our listeners as to just whether they're struggling with working too much or don't know if they have an optimal practice? What should they do?
I would recommend that people get coaching before you think you need coaching. I wish I would have gotten a coach before I started my practice. But there's been almost no times within my 6 years of running this firm that I haven't had some sort of business coach. And when you're choosing a coach, you really just want to find somebody who's accomplished what you're trying to accomplish and can save you a lot of the heartache, because they can speak from a place of, I've been there, and trust me, I'm gonna skip B, C, and D. I'm gonna take you from A to E right now. And so get a coach. It's worth the investment. The right coach, obviously, you got to vet your coach as well. They've got to earn it, but definitely get a coach as soon as you possibly can, and just put that money into that. It'll save you a lot of time and pain.
Yeah, I think that people kind of assume you only need a coach, kind of like you only need a counselor if you have a bunch of problems, right? But honestly, the highest optimized or best run firms out there had coaching at some point, if not continually, that just keeps them soaring. I have 4 or 5 different coaches all the time. So
Yeah.
huge proponent of it because they're just going to give you a different point of view, and you need an outside reference to the day to day because we really get in the weeds and sometimes we really mess it up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I'll say briefly is surround yourself with people who are like-minded and who are doing the same thing you're doing. So find your online community. I like the Realize group, which it's a kind of a tech focused accounting firm owners, and that's rlz.io. Great group. There's a lot of Facebook groups out there, but and whether maybe it's the CPA down the street, just find other people who are doing the same thing as you, and keep your mindset one of abundance because there's plenty of work out there. It should not feel competitive. There's so much work, there's so much need. We can all benefit from helping each other and sharing what we're doing instead of, holding things in. Just share all the information because it'll lift all of us up equally.
For sure. Yeah. Are there particular conferences that you really like to make sure that you go to?
I wish I could say yes. I'm actually trying to figure that out because there's a workflow conference I'm attending coming up in October. I think it's called Workflow Con. I think this is the first year they're doing it. I loved the lawyerist conference that I went to last year, but that's more on the legal side. I would love your recommendations on that, but I don't have any that I have found.
Yeah. So, gosh, I think it kind of depends a lot on your software providers. And because you tend to end up in this very like sphered off or siphoned off area when it comes to what you need to know and who you need to talk to. I'm still kind of readjusting because I was so into it for many years, and now I'm kind of just playing the field. So I don't really have, I loved QuickBooks Connect though. I really did. I Scaling new heights is really adding more tax components to things. So I'm hoping to get more involved with that one next year. And there's like a lot of just smaller ones that tend to be fun. But to me, no matter what conference you're at or any community you're at, like you learn the coolest gems from people from just talking to them face to face for 2 minutes versus, even just a Zoom conversation or whatever. I really started to appreciate that after COVID for sure.
Yeah, there was a conference I went to on a whim last year. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I went completely last minute and I went just to meet a couple of people. I wanted to meet Brandon Hall in person, and then I wanted to meet Dark Horse CPA. Can't remember his name. He's awesome. So I flew out to Chicago last minute just to meet those guys. That was the highlight of the conference for me. I was just being able to meet them in person and exchange some notes. And, I think I had one meal with each of them and learned so much from those conversations and opened the door for touch points during the year. I've messaged each of them, as needed. And that goes both ways. I think we all have something to offer to each other.
For sure. Yeah. I've had Brandon Hall on the podcast. And was it Chase Berkey that you're thinking of?
Yes. Yeah. Chase. He's
Okay, yeah.
awesome.
So
He is so
Chase,
awesome.
I need to ask him on the podcast too. We were on a 40 under 40 together for CPA practice advisors. So as I'm aging out, so you mentioned before we started the podcast that you used to have 3 tiers of packaging and that you changed that. Tell our listeners a little bit more about why.
Yeah. So what I found was offering 3 tiers. I didn't like that my clients were in the position to choose what level of service they would receive. The reason I didn't like that is because when they chose the wrong level of service, they had a bad experience. And
Yeah.
so they might make a decision based on price alone, where I know that they actually need more service because now they're an S corp, and so maybe the first tier didn't include reasonable compensation study. Maybe it didn't include managed payroll, and those are things I knew they would need, or accountable plan, whatever it was. And so, and then I had other clients who were paying too much and really had a simple structure and didn't need that much. And so, this was about a year and a half ago. Another just kind of breakthrough I had, which I decided to profile my clients. So I just looked at my client list, kind of took a 10,000-foot view, categorized them into 4 categories. So for us, we serve real estate professionals, startups, so solopreneurs, owner operators, and enterprise owners. And so those are the 4 categories. And for each of those, we went and defined what the criteria was. And these are all service providers. We don't do manufacturing. We don't do retail. And so they're, either professional service providers or construction. That's a big industry in Arizona. And so we looked at what are the defining characteristics of each group to start. Okay. So we kind of mapped that all out in this big Excel spreadsheet. And then we mapped out next for each of those categories, what do they need? What services are they absolutely in need of that are, if I didn't provide that service, I would be doing them a disservice. And so we defined that, and that became our scope of service for each of them. And then we looked at, okay, based on the services we're providing, what is the value based on the number of times we're going to meet with them, based on how many tax returns we're going to prepare, based on how many hours per month we think that we will be consulting with them. What's the value of that service we're providing to them? And then we came up with our fee. And then, like I said before, we check that against how much time are we spending, or are we, because this is all a big guess, right? When you start, how much time do we anticipate spending with each of these types of clients? And then are we making our profit margin doing that? Then we're good. Then that service is set. And these, we've adjusted it so many times, but now it's tweaks instead of overhauls, which is
Yeah.
really good. I think we have a good place now. And we actually did the same thing on the legal side, use the same 4 categories and just define that similarly.
So how do you define like enterprise level versus the one that was right below that?
Yeah, so enterprise level means they're operating they're running multiple operating businesses. So not just holding companies, but they've got multiple lines of service, multiple revenue sources that they're actively participating in.
Mhm.
Whereas an owner operator would be a single member S corp typically,
Okay.
and that person
Interesting.
just one operating business is all they're focused on. That's their primary, maybe their sole source of income.
Yeah. Okay. No, I love that. I think that's a really interesting way to do it. Okay. Cool. Well, we're coming up to the end of our time together to get our CPE for Earmark.
Good.
So shout out to Earmark. How can people reach out to you if they are like, I need to talk to Mike. He's amazing. I need more advice from him.
Oh yeah, in that unlikely event, they can just find me on LinkedIn. It's Mike Payne, JD CPA, or they can go to our website, bossadv.com. So like Boss Advisors, BOSSADV.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. This was super fun. I always love to dive into these nitty-gritty details of how people are doing things differently in their practices. So I really appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable with some of the things that have happened in your life, because it happens to all of us, and it's important, I think, to share. So on that note, this episode was brought to you by Tax Plan IQ, who has Jane, our new chatbot coming out that's based on GPT-4 that I am super excited about. It's going to make people like 70% more efficient in their tax advisory services. So go to taxplaniq.com to check that out. And thanks again, Mike. Take care.
Thank you.